Hello knitters, welcome to episode 22 of Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter and I'm a tech editor. And in today's video, we are going to be looking at how to measure yourself for arm length or arm span for knitting drop shoulder style sweaters. Because Rhinebeck is again right around the corner, I think a lot of us are looking at sweaters not only for Rhinebeck but for sweater weather. Yay, fall is almost here. And I just want to talk about how to understand how your arm length relates to the fit of the body and therefore the sleeves. So we're going to break down some examples of how that fits, or how the math works. Before we dive into that topic today though, I just wanted to put a little nugget in your brain about something that occurred last week. So last week I did my first live video with my friend Heather over at UU Yarns, and we got together and did a little video talking about choosing colors of yarns to complement some yarn that I have just finished spinning. It was my very first hank of hand spun yarn. And I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on live videos. If this was something that I decided to do, say, once a month and take 20 minutes one day a week to just answer some quick questions that don't require a full episode, would you be interested? Let me know in the comments what you think and what days of the week would be best for you. All right, I had to go take the dogs out and put them in my husband's office. They were doing a little dance party while I started this video. So, getting down to the heart of today's topic. As a garment knitter, I think most of us know, actually I should back up and say, if you are a garment knitter, you probably know that the length of a sleeve that goes on a sweater that you make for yourself is rarely one size fits all. We very often choose the size of garment that we want to knit based on the circumference of our chest, but just because we choose that size, it doesn't mean that the sleeves are going to fit us lengthwise. When a designer creates a garment, because they can't account for every variance in a knitter's body that is going to go into a specific circumference, we tend to work from averages that have been collected by various different bodies. There's the ASTM, or there's the Craft Yarn Council that has a wonderful body chart for size ranges. And so sleeve lengths can vary anywhere between 18 and 22 inches or 46 and 56 centimeters, depending on the body size that it's going on. But there's a big misconception that I will touch on briefly today about a larger chest circumference being equivalent to longer arms. And I thought I would give you a really fun example from my real world. This here is my close friend Heather. She and I met about 12 years ago on a yarn crawl. She owns a wonderful company called UU Yarns, and we are coincidentally the same circumference at the chest. However, as you can see, Heather is significantly taller than I am. I am about 5'3". Heather is around 5'11". So the arm span difference between us is massive despite the circumference of our bodies being the same. So I'm going to use some real world examples today about how chest circumference and therefore garment circumference, specifically relating to drop shoulder style sweaters, fits different bodies and how you can adapt the sleeves to fit you best. So let's start at taking a look at how I measure my body to figure out my arm length and where I want the sleeves to fall on my body, and what the best practice is for a drop shoulder style sweater. I just want to clarify that this same method does not necessarily work in the same way for raglan style sweaters or circular yoke style sweaters. We're going to be specifically looking at drop shoulder style sweaters because it seems to be the style that has the most issues with sleeve lengths. So first things first, If you have someone that can help you, that you feel comfortable asking to do this measurement with you, it's going to be a lot easier. But if you don't have someone to help you, I'm going to give you an option on how to take some measurements so that you can be successful even if you don't have an extra set of hands. Put a hand on your hip because we're going to be looking for the measurement from the center back of your neck down a bent arm and to the point on your body where you want your sleeve to stop. This is called the cervical or cervical, I'm not actually sure how to say it, to wrist measurement. So you're going to want to take a sewer's tape measure. I should have pulled this out before I started. A sewer's tape measure or a flexible tape measure. You're going to want to place one end at the back of your neck, right on that spinal bump that's at the base of your neck, and drape it down your arm, over your elbow to the point that you want your sleeve to stop at. Once you've taken that measurement, that's the cervical to wrist measurement that I just mentioned, and then you're going to multiply it by 2 to get your full arm span across your back shoulders and from wrist to wrist. So if you don't have someone at home to help you with this measurement, you can go to your closet and look for a drop shoulder style sweater that you may already have. If you like the length of the sleeves, you can simply lay the garment flat so you can see the entire garment, and you're simply going to measure from one end to the other to get the full length of that arm span. Now, if you have a drop shoulder style garment that perhaps sits a little bit too long on you or sits a little bit shorter than you want your sleeves to be, you can add in that difference to account for the length that you would like your garment to, or the sleeves of your garment to sit, and consider that your full wrist to wrist measurement. So let's take a quick look at why this works for a drop shoulder style sweater. The basic shape of a drop shoulder style sweater, as you can see up on the screen, is very flat from end to end. There may be some shoulder shaping at the neckline to account for any shoulder slope that you have, but your sleeves essentially come straight out from the edge of your armholes straight down to the wrist. There's no shaping that holds the sleeves closer to your body. So it's almost as if you were laying straight out doing, say, a snow angel or a sand angel, depending on where you live. Unlike a raglan or circular yoke style sweater, where the shape of the yoke is narrower at the shoulders and wider at the underarms, on a drop shoulder style sweater, the yoke is the same width all the way up the body and up the shoulder seams. The wider the body is relative to your shoulders, the more drop you get down the arm, and this directly affects how much sleeve we need to add or remove to our garments. So as I mentioned at the top of the episode, there are some average arm lengths that are applied to garments when designers are creating new designs. The average arm span for adults can have a huge range depending on body styles, and can go all the way from 56 inches, this is arm span, just to be clear, not sleeve length, can go all the way from 56 inches or 142 centimeters up to about 73 inches or 185.5 centimeters. So that range is huge. Now, it's really important to note that when you're looking at average size charts, as I mentioned earlier, there does seem to be a misconception that arm span is relative to chest circumference. This has definitely not been my experience. So when you see this in charts or patterns, it's important to take that with a grain of salt and make sure you've measured your body correctly. So now I thought it would be fun to look at some real-world examples of how height versus arm span versus body circumference can change from person to person. So I'm going to go back to the example that I used a little bit earlier of myself and my friend Heather. There is about an 8-inch difference vertically between us in height, but our body circumference is the same. You might be amused but not surprised to learn that Heather's arm span is 64 inches from wrist to wrist using the cervical to wrist measurement, whereas mine is about 53 inches. If you remember, I talked earlier about the range of sleeve or arm spans that are provided in standard publications of body averages. And the low end was at 56 inches, which means my arms are even shorter than that, which is also how I earned the nickname T-Rex arms from Heather. I do have very short arms for my body. But in any case, knowing that Heather and I have the same chest circumference, but such a wild variance in our arm spans, I thought I would show you some examples of what that looks like when you put the same size garment on our bodies. So the first example I'm going to show you on both myself and Heather, just in a silhouette, it's not actually our bodies, but they have been scaled appropriately, is on a garment that has a 46-inch circumference. So when we are looking at a drop shoulder style sweater, the circumference of the garment directly relates to the flat measurement of the garment. So because it is 46 inches in circumference, it means it's 23 inches wide. So I'm going to get an example of this up on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So as we established earlier, my arm span from wrist to wrist is about 53 inches, which is pretty short. At a metric conversion, that is 134.5 centimeters. If I want to knit this drop shoulder style sweater that is 46 inches or 117 centimeters in circumference, the important detail there is the width of the garment. So half of the garment, or the width of the garment, is 23 inches or 58.5 centimeters. That won't change across the body or up to your shoulders. It's the same width all the way across. Now, if you have large breasts as part of your chest circumference, you may find that the garment is just slightly less wide at the widest part of your body because our chest pulls it forward. But by the time we get up to our shoulders, it's not really any narrower. So we're dealing with a full width of 23 inches or 58.5 centimeters. If I then was to knit 18-inch sleeves on each end of this 23-inch wide body, the total width of the garment across the shoulders, or basically the wrist to wrist length, is 59 inches. That means for my 53-inch arm span, my sleeves are going to be about 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters too long. So it's going to hang farther past my wrist than I hoped for it to be. If we put the same garment on Heather, who has a wrist-to-wrist arm span of 64 inches, the sleeves are going to be too short. It'll be 59 inches, so the width of the body plus the length of the sleeves doesn't change, but now you've put much longer arms, despite the circumference of the body being the same, into the same garment, and the sleeves are going to be about 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters short of the target wrist measurement. So if you've been following along and sort of understanding where I'm going with the math of this, you can probably see where I'm going to be going with my next example here. I'm going to show you an example where you put an even larger garment on the same body. As the garment gets wider, it's going to be pushing the sleeves longer and longer. So if we think about, let's think about The Weekender by Andrea Mowry. This is still one of my favorite oversized sweaters. It's very easy to knit. And fits lovely, but it is about 10 inches of positive ease. That's kind of the upper end of the recommended range. So that means relative to my chest circumference, which is around 41 inches, I'm going to have a 51-inch circumference garment or a 25.5-inch wide or 65 centimeter wide garment on my body. And so here's what that's going to look like. Much like the previous example where it was already too wide, because the body was wider and the sleeves were therefore too long, we've now added extra width. So rather than the sleeves being only 3 inches too long for my arms, they're now going to be about 4.25 inches or 10.5 centimeters too long because the width of the body got wider, but the sleeves didn't get any shorter. If we take a quick look at the same example on a body like Heather, where you've got a much wider arm span, we've got this slightly wider body, which does make the sleeves longer, but not enough to accommodate her extra large, or her wider arm span than mine. She's still going to be about 1.25 inches short on her sleeves. So it's getting better for someone like Heather, but worse for someone like me. And this is why it's so important to know your body measurements. So no matter where you fall in the range of arm spans, whether you have short arms like me or long arms like Heather, or you fall somewhere in between, there is something we can do to adjust the length of a sleeve so that it fits us better, no matter what the width of the body of the sweater is that's going onto us. And the math is fairly straightforward, but let's walk through it just to make sure that nothing gets missed or assumed the wrong way. So to work the math for your own body, you're going to need to go back to the cervical to wrist measurement, or the wrist to wrist arm span measurement that you've already taken. For the purposes of this example, I'm kind of going to split the difference between my measurements and Heather's, because I know my arms are really short and I know that Heather's are actually quite long. So for the purposes of this example, we're going to say that the body that we're going to be putting this sweater on has a 58-inch or 147-ish centimeter arm span. Now let's say we want to put a 40-inch circumference sweater on this body. So we already know from earlier that the circumference directly relates to the width by dividing the number by 2. So if we have a 40-inch circumference sweater, when we divide it by 2, that means we have a 20-inch wide sweater that we're going to be putting on the body. So the first thing we're going to do is going to take the total arm span, so 58 inches, and we're going to subtract the width of the garment from it. So 58 inches minus 20 inches for the width of the garment is 38 inches. Or if we do that in metric, we've got 147.3 centimeter wingspan, and we're going to subtract the 50.8 centimeter wide body of the garment, and we're going to end up with 96.5 centimeters. The next step is to simply divide that result by 2 to get the length that we need for both sleeves, or rather for each sleeves. So for the first example in the inches, or the US units, we will take our result of 38 inches, divide it by 2, and we get 19 inches. So what that tells us is if our total arm span is 58 inches wide, the width of the garment that we're going to be putting on it is 20 inches wide, we need 19-inch sleeves to make up the total span of the arm span. Just to do that one more time really quickly in metric, the result of subtracting the width of the body from the total arm span was 96.5 centimeters. We're going to divide that by 2 and determine that our sleeves need to be around 48.25 centimeters for the target length from the armhole, picked up edge, all the way down to the wrist. So if we take kind of a real world example of what that looks like based on my previous examples, let's go back to the last example where we were using a garment that was 51 inches in circumference or 25.5 inches in width. If I want to have that circumference or width of body, so 25.5 inches wide, on my body with my short arms, I'm going to subtract the 25.5 inches from the full arm span for myself, which is 53 inches, and that works out to be 27.5 inches. When I divide that by 2, it turns out that my sleeves will need to be only 13.75 inches, or 13.75 inches. In metric, that's 35 centimeters. If we compare that to sort of the average length of a sweater, most sweaters that I knit have an average sleeve length of about 18 inches. So that means that my sleeve is going to be about 4.25 inches short of what the designer averages out for the arm lengths to be, which sounds pretty extreme, and it is. But I don't want to have 18-inch sleeves if I need a 13.75 inch sleeve. So when we need to subtract that much length from a design, Or on the other side of it, if we needed to add length for someone with an arm span like Heather's, it does mean that we're going to need to adapt the spacing of the shaping down the length of the sleeve. So I'm not going to go into those details in this video specifically. In episode 3 of this podcast, which I will link in the description below, I break down the math of how to adjust the spacing of your sleeve for the length of sleeve you want to knit. So that will be information that you can get from that separate video. If you are knitting your sleeve shorter, you don't really have a lot of options. Well, that's not true. You could choose not to adapt the spacing, and you would end up simply with a wider sleeve at your target length because you won't have been able to work the total number of decreases. I don't personally recommend that. I think you should still use the dimensions that the sleeve calls for in terms of circumference. You just have to adapt how frequently you work those decreases. If you are knitting a longer sleeve, you can leave the spacing as the designer has called for it to be. And what it means is you will simply have a longer length, or a longer distance between the final shaping round and the end of the sleeve. You can, of course, also choose to increase the spacing of the decreases on your sleeve, but that's really more a matter of personal preference. All right, and that's where we're going to call it for today, folks. We've done another video on sweater modifications. We were really heavy on sweater modifications at the start of this podcast season. Episodes 1 through 8, I think, have quite a lot of discussions about modifications. So here's one more feather in your cap. If you enjoyed today's video or any of my modification videos, I would love for you to hit the like button on this video and to subscribe to my channel. And yes, I know to some extent that's pandering, but the more likes and subscribes I get, the more people get to see these videos. It's part of the YouTube algorithm, and it just allows me to help more knitters on their knitting journey. Next week, we are finally going to tackle a write-in request that I had from someone several months ago. It's going to be a slightly more technique-driven video where we're going to have some examples on the screen with lots of little diagrams. We're going to be looking at buttonholes. We'll look at why you would use horizontal buttonholes versus vertical buttonholes in a garment, and more specifically with vertical buttonholes, how they're constructed, so you get an understanding of how to apply it to a button band if you want to use a doubled button band or a single button band. And I'll give you tips on how to reinforce your buttonholes as well. Thank you so much for being here with me this week, my friends. I always enjoy spending time with you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, weekend, and as always, happy knitting.